In 1907, a Canadian court was forced to take an official legal position on whether a monster exists, not metaphorically, not in the way courts sometimes wrestle with definitions and edge cases. A judge, a prosecution, a defense team, and a jury, in a real courtroom, in a documented proceeding that is still part of the public record, had to decide whether the Wendigo was real. They ruled it was not. Two men had already acted as though it was. One of them died before the verdict. The other received a pardon 3 months after he died. This is that story. But to understand what happened in that courtroom, you first need to understand what the Wendigo is, and more importantly, what it means. The Wendigo is not a ghost story. It is not a campfire creation designed to keep children from wandering into the woods at night, though it has served that purpose. Among the Cree, Ojibwe, and Algonquian peoples of North America, the Wendigo is something older and considerably more precise than a folk legend. It is a spirit of possession, a force that enters a person, usually during winter, usually during periods of extreme cold and hunger, and transforms them from the inside out. The transformation is not sudden, it is gradual. The person begins to change. They stop eating. They grow restless, unable to sleep. They become convinced that they are turning into something inhuman. In the most severe cases, they begin to crave human flesh. And in some documented accounts, they act on that craving. The Cree had a name for this condition: Wendigo psychosis. Western psychology would not acknowledge it as a clinical phenomenon until the 20th century. The communities who lived through harsh northern winters understood it long before that, and they had a solution. Certain individuals within these communities were understood to possess the ability to intervene, to confront the Wendigo and stop the possession before it reached its worst outcome. This intervention was not symbolic. It was not ceremonial in the way outsiders often assumed. It was, by necessity, sometimes fatal. The afflicted person would be killed, not out of malice, not out of cruelty, out of a conviction held deeply and collectively that what remained of the person they loved was no longer fully that person, and that allowing the possession to continue would cost more lives than the one already being lost. This is what Jack Fiddler did for decades. The Wendigo is not a recent invention. The first written record of the phenomenon comes from French Jesuit missionaries who traveled into the Northern Territories in the early 1600s. They documented encounters with indigenous people who described the spirit in consistent, specific terms: possession, transformation, cannibalistic impulse. The missionaries dismissed it as superstition. The communities they were visiting did not have the luxury of dismissal. They lived in environments where winter could be catastrophic, where food sources could vanish entirely, where the psychological cost of isolation and starvation could become visible in the behavior of people around them. By 1878, the phenomenon had produced its most documented case. A man named Swift Runner, a Cree guide who had worked with the Northwest Mounted Police, came out of the woods near Fort Saskatchewan in the spring of that year. He reported that his entire family had died of starvation over the course of the winter. The authorities found something different. The remains of 8 people, his wife, his mother-in-law, his brother, and 5 of his children, were scattered around his winter camp. The evidence was unambiguous. Swift Runner was convicted of murder and hanged in 1879. He told investigators before his death that the Wendigo had taken him. The court did not engage with that claim. They accepted his confession of what he had done. They did not address whether something had compelled him to do it. In 1913, 6 years after the Fiddler trial, a psychiatrist named Morton Tyker began the most comprehensive academic study of Wendigo possession cases ever conducted. His research identified more than 70 documented cases across the historical record. The cases shared consistent features: gradual behavioral deterioration, loss of appetite, insomnia, increasing agitation, and in the most severe instances, cannibalism or the expressed desire for it. 70 cases. That number is not the product of exaggeration or cultural misunderstanding. It is drawn from court records, missionary logs, Hudson's Bay Company documents, and contemporary accounts collected across 2 centuries. Jack Fiddler had addressed at least 14 of them personally. Jack Fiddler, known in his own community as Jau no Gijigo Galbo, which translates roughly as "he who stands in the southern sky," was the leader of a band of Subartic Cree in what is now northern Ontario. He was, by most contemporary accounts, an elderly man by the time the Canadian authorities became interested in him. Estimates of his age at the time of his arrest range from 75 to 87 years old. He was not a violent man by temperament. He was a community leader, a spiritual authority, and by the standards of the world he inhabited, a healer. His role as someone who could intervene against Wendigo possession was not self-appointed. It was inherited. His father had held the same responsibility. His community understood what he did and why he did it, and they did not regard it as murder. The Canadian government regarded it differently. In the summer of 1907, a Methodist missionary named Thomas Ferrier filed a report with authorities describing what he had heard about Jack Fiddler's activities. The report was enough to dispatch a party of Northwest Mounted Police officers into the wilderness to find him. They found him, and when they explained what he was being charged with, Jack Fiddler did not deny it. He told them what he had done. He told them why. He explained that his most recent intervention, the killing of a woman from his band who had shown the signs of possession, had been necessary. He had done what was required of him. The officers arrested him and his son Joseph and began the long journey back toward civilization. Jack Fiddler never made it. The journey from the Fiddler Band's territory to the nearest settlement was approximately 400 kilometers on foot. Jack Fiddler made most of that journey in the custody of men who did not speak his language in the late summer heat of the boreal forest, at an age when most men in his community would no longer have been expected to travel at all. At some point near the Sandy Lake area, the officers stopped to rest. Jack Fiddler walked to a tree near the river. He used his sash, the length of fabric he had worn around his waist his entire life, to hang himself. He was dead before anyone reached him. He was never tried. He never faced a judge or a jury. He never had the opportunity to explain, through an interpreter in a courtroom, why the thing he had done was not the thing the court believed it to be. His son Joseph was not given the same exit. Joseph Fiddler stood trial. The trial of Joseph Fiddler opened in 1907 in the town of Kenora, Ontario. It was, by any reasonable measure, one of the most unusual legal proceedings in Canadian history. The charge was murder. The victim was the woman who had, in the understanding of her own community, been in the process of becoming a Wendigo. The question before the court was whether Joseph Fiddler had killed her. He had. He did not dispute it. The defense team faced a challenge that had no legal precedent. Their argument was not that Joseph Fiddler had acted in self-defense in the conventional sense. Their argument was something considerably more difficult to articulate to a jury of settlers: that the act had been committed within a framework of belief, practice, and communal responsibility that predated the Canadian legal system by centuries. and that within that framework, it was not murder. The prosecution's position was simpler. Canadian law recognizes murder as the unlawful killing of a human being. A human being had been killed. The law applied. The judge instructed the jury to set aside the question of the Wendigo's existence. This was, in effect, an instruction to set aside the entire context of the act. What remained, stripped of that context, was unambiguous. Joseph Fiddler was found guilty. He was sentenced to death. Then something shifted. Advocacy groups, legal scholars, and members of the public who had followed the case began raising objections, not to the verdict exactly, but to what the verdict represented. A legal system imported from another continent had just convicted a man for following a tradition his community had practiced for generations, in a territory his community had inhabited long before that legal system existed. The federal government granted Joseph Fiddler a pardon. He died in prison 3 months before it was processed. The pardon arrived. Joseph Fiddler was not there to receive it. Here is the detail that does not appear in most retellings of this story. In the course of the Fiddler trial, the court was required to take a position on the Wendigo, not on whether the Wendigo was a reasonable object of fear, or whether the communities who feared it had cause for their fear, or whether the concept had a documented psychological basis. The court was required to determine whether the Wendigo, as a possessing entity capable of transforming a human being, was real. The court ruled that it was not. This ruling was not made lightly, and it was not made without awareness of its implications. The attorneys involved understood that they were not simply adjudicating a murder case. They were issuing an official determination about the belief system of an entire people. The ruling stood, and the question it was supposed to answer has never been fully resolved. Wendigo psychosis, the clinical condition that Morden Teicher documented in over 70 cases, is now recognized as a genuine psychological phenomenon. The behaviors it produces are real. The suffering it creates is real. Whether a spiritual entity causes those behaviors, or whether the entity is a cultural framework for understanding a psychological crisis that the communities experiencing it had no other vocabulary for. That is a question the court did not address, because it was not a question the court was equipped to answer. It may not be a question any court ever could. The Wendigo has since appeared in films, in novels, in video games, in every format the modern entertainment industry deploys to process the things that unsettle us. It has been given a face, a body, a weakness that the protagonist eventually discovers and exploits. That is how stories like this are usually resolved. But this story does not resolve. Jack Fiddler died on the side of a trail in the boreal forest, having never seen a courtroom. Joseph Fiddler died in a prison cell, 3 months before a piece of paper arrived that would have freed him. The woman they had intervened on behalf of, the woman the court called a victim, died at the hands of people who believed, without question, that they were protecting everyone around her. Maybe it was never about proving whether the Wendigo was real. Maybe it was about something worse, the possibility that something can take hold of a person and leave behind just enough of who they used to be, that the people who love them are forced to make a decision no one should ever have to make. That decision destroyed 2 families. One of them was the family of the woman who died. The other was the family of the men who killed her, because they believed they had no choice. If you made it this far, thank you for watching and for keeping these stories alive. Make sure to hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because next time we're uncovering a true story even darker than this one. Until then, stay curious, stay safe, and never forget to say thank you. Thanks for watching.